Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webcast, Virtual Going Viral, Reimagining How and Where Work Gets Done, sponsored by Oracle and PwC. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and can be submitted for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and type them there. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast has ended. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to our presenters, Lori Pearson, Brittany Hovell, and Nick Allums.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lori Pearson. It's nice to be with you this afternoon, and thanks for joining us. There's my picture. It's always so funny. You look at the picture of yourself, and you're like, yeah, that was me about a year and a half ago before pandemic casual hit. And so I work for Oracle. I work in our HCM transformation space. I come alongside our customers and help them with their HR strategy, how to think about technology, where's the future of work going, and help them get to their business goals. And today I'm joined by Nick and Brittany from PwC, and I will let them introduce themselves before we start with our conversation. So Nick, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. And my picture is actually a little more recent. We actually just had a little fall family
Oh, so cute.
photo event just a few weeks ago. So yeah, I'm a director in our HR transformation practice at PwC. Been with the firm for between 12 and 13 years now, and lead a lot of the global transformation, particularly technology-led transformation work that we do. Really specialize in the impacts into talent management and the tie-in from people strategy to business strategy. And excited to be here with you today, Lori. Brittany, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Hovell, and like Nick, I too am a part of the PwC HR Transformation Group. I have helped clients through all phases of the transformation lifecycle, from software selection, implementation, and then I've gotten to work on a lot of multi-pillars, so HCM coupled with ERP and supply chain. And I'm excited to be here with you all virtually today to have a conversation around some of the trends that we're seeing and share some of the data behind them. So thank you.
So good to be spending time with you guys today to walk through this data and the trends that you're seeing. As you can tell, we're all pretty informal and we really appreciate the conversation. So we would ask that you would post your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom, and we will address them as we can as we go through the discussion today. And if possible, we will. And if not, we'll hold them to the end and see if we can't get to them. So I'll turn it over to you, Brittany, to kick us off, and Nick.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Lori.
Sure.
Yeah, Brittany, I was just going to ask you to flip to the agenda here. Yeah, well, first of all, again, thanks, Lori, for inviting us to join you here, and appreciate the opportunity to connect with everyone today. Today, we're going to look at really what we think are some interesting data points that we've seen in the market at PwC over really both a short and a little bit longer term perspective. And also look at how work is continuing to change as we move forward now, 9 months into a very dramatically different way of working that we have, I'm assuming most of us have shifted into. So we've got a couple of different surveys that we're marrying together to get a little more complete look. We've looked at things really from the CHRO level and the exec level down, but then also from the employee level up. And so we're going to take a look at where that data meets in the middle today to see if we can get a better line of sight on like what the heck is actually going on in the workforce today in light of all the changes that have happened in 2020, and hopefully have some discussion about what that means going forward in this environment that for many of us is almost completely virtual. I'm sure some of us that's changing, but for many of us, we continue to live in that world. So we're going to give you an opportunity to weigh in with your own responses on some questions that we surveyed CHROs across the Fortune 1000 with, and then we'll see how your responses stack up and talk about some of those specific changes that we're seeing in HR as a result of some of these data points. And then from there, I'll let Brittany take a little bit deeper dive into some of the specific changes we're seeing, not just in response to COVID. I know that's probably a lot about what you're expecting to hear today, but what we've actually seen is that the challenge for HR is really a little more complex than that. simple move out of the traditional office into a remote working environment, there was really already a digital disruption coming and in progress to one degree or another in many industries. And this virtual move has really just acted as a catalyst to really accelerate that change. So with that in mind, to get us started, Brittany, why don't you flip to this initial poll question here? And I believe the question is going to pop up in Zoom here for you, but which of the following pose the biggest challenges for your business when delivering on your company's workforce priorities? So we've got employee anxiety and burnout, lack of tools to accelerate collaboration, and then weakened culture in a virtual world. And so we'll give everyone a moment to respond here. And while you're answering the poll, I'll share a little bit just about the data that we're collecting that we're going to look at today. We conduct a monthly pulse survey that gets a response from usually 200 to 300 CHROs, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, in the Fortune 1000. It's kind of short and sweet, but it provides us with nearly real-time insights into how people's strategies are changing in the world's largest organizations. If none apply, I guess you're in a great spot. I would say maybe the one that most closely relates to where you're at. So it looks like we've got a pretty good bit of response here. So what we're seeing, assuming we've got everyone responded here, 51% have responded with employee anxiety and burnout, 19% lack of tools to accelerate collaboration, creativity, and coaching, and 28% weakened culture in a virtual world. So Brittany, if you want to flip us forward here. So how does that look like? 51% on the nose. You guys are
That's right.
lining up great with what we saw from our survey. You'll see more than one response here. Our CHROs had an ability to kind of rank and respond a little bit differently. But, I guess to me, unsurprisingly, somewhere, like I said earlier, we're about 9 months into this significant change in how we quote unquote go to work, right? Especially for most of the corporate workforce. The top priority for more than 50% of the HR execs that we surveyed is employee anxiety and burnout. Certainly, we've seen a lot of different factors as Brittany and I, and really across our HR practice at PwC, as we've met with our clients, there's a lot of different factors driving that. Certainly economic challenges, right? In a time of economic uncertainty, we expect our employee base to deal with a lot more stress and uncertainty, though that might not be as big of a factor as you may think. We'll see a little bit more about that later in the deck. But actually, I think the other two factors help drive the overall level of anxiety that's happening, right? The lack of adequate tools causes anxiety for employees who, what we're hearing from the employee level is that they can see that how they work needs to change, but they don't necessarily feel equipped to perform the task ahead of them. So many organizations are also struggling to maintain that culture that likely either attracted their best talent or caused their best talent to decide to stay once they got there. I have a financial services client that I've done a lot of work with over the years that has really felt the brunt of that culture struggle. It's a big part of who the organization is. But as we've met with them, they're actually doing one of the best jobs I've seen of dealing well with it. Like most organizations, they spent the first, 8 to 12 weeks from March, April, and to part of May, as the country came almost to like a near standstill, just trying to survive and keep the business going, right? Figure out how we're going to adapt in a world that pretty much changed overnight. I know for me personally, I got the call. I was expecting to be in another city for a couple of more days, and I was told, get on the plane and come home. You should probably cancel your ticket for next week. And I have worked from where I'm sitting right now every day since then. And I'm in a job where I was flying 80 to 100,000 miles a year. So, I mean, it was just on a dime, life changed, right? But one thing that made this organization really successful, I think, in developing their own new normal is that they didn't shy away from that issue of what's going to happen to our culture. They went and dealt with it head on. And it might seem a little counterintuitive, but they were coming very much from a face-to-face, open doors atmosphere, drop by anytime, have that quick conversation, and really had to answer the question, how do we prioritize that kind of culture now? And for them, it's because they asked themselves the hard question: if we can't do that anymore, how do we replace that experience? And what they found they really valued was that they were able to have these quick, impactful, ad hoc conversations. And so as they began to look at, hey, we've known we needed to really ramp up our collaboration tools for a while. How do we quickly get our workforce to know how to do that? They picked what they felt like was most important to them and prioritized. Even focused on changing behaviors, right? Quick text chats, they're not the same as a phone call, right? A live, quick conversations. And so it's just one lever they've pulled, but it's some of the successful responses that we're seeing are from organizations who've looked at, hey, these are the hard things that are changing, but we're not going to concede that our culture has to change. We're going to figure out what's most valuable about it, and adapt and promote behaviors that align with that. And really what we've seen is, lack of tools to do that, plus the changing culture equals a high degree of stress, right? And then I think the other thing is some of the data points on the right actually help contribute to it as well. I know when we first started getting this data in, I was actually a little surprised by it. That again, it's not the be all end all. It's not applicable to every industry and every organization, but there are a lot of HR execs who are expecting to have to deal with increased headcount over the next 12 months as they look into 2021, right? Different reasons for many organizations, just to preserve the long-term health of their business, viability of the organization, had to reduce headcount in 2020. And as we look forward to hopeful bounce backs in 21, there's a lot of forecasts that the organization is going to hit the need to at least replace part of that workforce that was diminished in 2020, right? And then even just from a changing global standpoint, there's even been more of a shift to more onshore jobs. Kind of the inverse of what we've been seeing for a long time is more and more roles have gone offshore. Really a projection that some of that's going to come back onshore, really for a litany of different reasons, right? But regardless of why headcount is increasing, what we're seeing is that HR leaders are feeling the need to deal with the workforce that's anxious about the future, concerned about the organization's ability to support them. So you can also see, I mean, just the changes of not even knowing where your people are, which also creates a tax problem, right? That has to be dealt with, and married with the challenge of knowing that the workforce needs to be equipped to work differently and better operate in a completely virtual world. I don't know, Lori, are you looking at the questions? Have we had anything interesting come in here so far, or significant come in so far?
No questions yet. I think this is all, I think it validates everything that, we heard from the people who are participating today, right? And part of it too is I also look at anxiety separately than burnout, but sometimes the treatment is still the same, right? And I can tell you personally, I filled my commuting time that I used to commute, whether it was on a plane or in a car, with more work, right? So part of, how I'm feeling is around like, okay, so how do I draw better boundaries, right? Like I didn't have to worry about my dog snoring behind me during a meeting or freaking out, or a kid coming in, right? When I was in an office or with a customer. So it just adds to, my brain being overtaxed on how these things, how I'm navigating, right? And how the customers that I work with are navigating. And, to your point, like in the beginning, there was a lot of companies that were growing exponentially, right? Depending on the industry, and some that were contracting pretty rapidly and navigating through that. So for our HR peers, it becomes even more exhausting, right? When you kind of stack everything on top of it. But I think the data that you have on what's coming next and what those challenges are is pretty interesting. So if we flip to that next slide, there's some
Yep, absolutely. That's where we're at now. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, appreciate the transition, Lori. Yeah, and really what I want to Did you have something else, Lori? Sorry.
No.
Okay.
I'm like, yes, yeah. So
No, you're
I'm
good.
super
You're
encouraging.
good. Yeah, no. And really, that's really what I wanted to double click into is that last kind of challenge that we're hitting on there, knowing that the workforce has to be equipped to work a little differently. And here you can see we probed that same group of HR execs for really what challenges do they continue to expect now? And this is a question we've asked a few times since March, and the numbers have shifted around, but I believe this was from, actually, this is very recent. I think this was from November survey, this particular spread of data points. And here's what's interesting to me, because I was looking at the employee up data about 18 months ago for a different type of presentation where we were looking at kind of how employees' needs are being met in the workforce. And it's very interesting to me that the top rated challenge that the HR executives see is attempting to address the need to upskill and retrain employees. The reason it aligns really well with what we're actually seeing our technology surveys and our HR technology surveys that went employee and manager focused and then went up to the HR exec levels. It's why what it appears is that really this change from that as we've had to respond to COVID, really what's happened is it's really just accelerated a change that was coming. That maybe we should have realized was in flight, but now we don't have any choice, right? As in HR, we have to do something. Employees want to be, in particular, digitally relevant. It seems there is an implicit understanding in the workforce that, hey, my job is changing, right? We were already seeing employees ask questions like, is the job I'm in now really preparing me for the rest of my career, right? And so all these other initiatives, they're not all related to upskilling or digital upskilling, but many of them are. We see there's a thread of it that weaves through several of these other data points, right? So while 28% of those that responded, talk about upskilling, retaining employees to help drive revenue, upskilling actually helps enable many of these other areas, right? If we just look at the next highest, 25% of CHROs are concerned about supporting remote work. I think we all realize there's an inherent learning curve to taking someone from a face-to-face, stop by my office culture and shifting to a Zoom culture, right? There are some challenges with that are different based on different demographic backgrounds, right? However, supporting remote work most effectively, it needs to extend well beyond communication tools and platforms, right? Brittany's going to touch on this in a bit, but there are numerous other digital skills that we need for employees to be most effective in remote working environments. And it's really about true collaboration tools, right? I've seen many clients who did a great job of teaming and working very collaboratively in whiteboard sessions try to replace that with email and phone calls, and it's not the same thing. So it doesn't replicate the heart of what's most valuable there about collaboration, that idea of co-authoring solutions, right? And so where we've seen organizations really invest in collaboration tools, true platforms that can bring employees together to co-author solutions, is where we've seen greater success. I think the other thing that jumps out to me here is 20% of HR execs are concerned about retaining high-performing employees. As we'll see on the next slide, your top employees need to understand, I guess for lack of a better phrase, where things are headed, right? The new economic climate's very different than what we've seen during times of recession or other economic changes in the past, right? And while there's certainly anxiety in the workforce, it's anxiety about where careers are headed in many respects. So what does that mean for HR and the organization? It means HR needs to be able to show employees what's possible for them in the future. And Brittany, if you don't mind, flip back. There's one other I think we'll hit on here on the previous slide. But as we think about that notion of what's possible for me in the future as an employee, For many organizations, that's the combination of multiple technologies, multiple tools, what it takes to get there. I think first and foremost, we've seen a lot of organizations moving from, I'll say, antiquated on-premise technology solutions to more modern technology platforms in the cloud, particularly for not just the core HR function, but for talent management systems as well. Yep. And at this point, as we're trying to build that foundation to move forward in 21, I think that's more important than ever, right? The ability to take advantage of new features, new things, new functionality that comes out from software vendors who are immersed trying to learn how to respond to these same issues as well. Really gives us a more feature-rich platform than some of the more traditional on-premise solutions we've seen in the past.
I would agree. And as we go to how the employees are feeling too, one of the things about this slide and the next one is around, I have to, when we talk about upskilling and training and support and how do we provide that, companies where they've invested in technology were better positioned before the pandemic, as the pandemic came to play, because they had more data insight into their organization, right? So they were able to quickly flip, and it was sort of it was built-in resilience for them, right? And they were able to achieve and stick with the business goals that they had laid out, and able to provide more support and transparency throughout the organization for the associates, right? It's one thing to talk about them upskilling and retraining, but I got to start with what do I know and what do I have and how do I think about that, right? And so from the employee perspective, I want to know, here's what I have, here's what that looks like for me in the organization. How do I feel about that from a security perspective? And then how much time do I want to invest in what's next, right? Which I think gets us to the next slide too, on how the employees were feeling, which is where I probably pulled you back from. Sorry.
No. It's perfect, Lori, and it actually ties in with one of the things I was going to talk about is, that foundational shift.
Yeah.
My clients who have already made that shift are now taking some pretty exciting next steps on top of it, right? As we've gone to this virtual world, what it did is pull some projects that they were thinking of as very futuristic, nice to have things, have now become, we've got to have it, right? And I'm talking about things like artificial intelligence engines, laying that on top of the new ability to pull all of that talent data into one place. So things like skills, competencies, what training programs have people been through, certifications. We've even worked with clients to map out, how do I capture like what I would think of as key work experiences in a way that an artificial intelligence engine can deal with, and match people with potential career paths that they may never have even thought of, right? There's certainly a burden to map some of that out, but it's an investment, to your point, Lori, that is paying off extremely high dividends for a lot of organizations right now. As we look at a lot of third-party exit survey data from organizations, one of the leading factors we see for voluntary turnover is lack of a career path. And unfortunately, for a lot of organizations, that's not an accurate perception, right? People are leaving because they're just not aware of the opportunities. And so that's where we've seen AI really start to fill in this gap of turning that, I call it the traditional career ladder, into really a career lattice work, right? Numerous options to get experience across the organization through like both horizontal and vertical moves, right? And so the end result for organizations who have already figured this out is, if we play it forward, they're now seeing people move into executive leadership roles that know the organization inside and out. They've been across and gotten the perspective of different aspects of the business than they may have otherwise. And that same combination also works top down, right? Helps address some of the challenge of having the right data to make good workforce decisions, right? As well as your workforce looks for opportunities and begins to build out their own talent profiles. Artificial intelligence analytics can help predict not only career paths for individual, but potential talent gaps for the organization, and provide the business with things like heat maps to show where top talent is across the organization. And just like predicting career paths can model out where should we best use the people that we have.
That's right. And where do they exist in
Lori,
the world?
were you going to say something?
No, I
Yeah.
was going to talk about where they sit in the world, and we're going to talk about that. I think there's a piece around
Yeah.
where does the work sit, right? So as we think about how tools and technology bring us together, it's an interesting dialogue. There is a piece on the next slide though around how our employees are feeling, right? So we've talked about
Yep.
how HR leaders are feeling, and we're talking about this skills piece, right? Which immediately I like. Oh, I mean, you know, come on, we all think about our job security. There have been days in the last 9 months where I'm sure we've all sat around and kind of thought like, oh my gosh, like let me do my own business continuity planning for my household, right? So do you want to walk us through this slide?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great news because I know a lot of times when I have this conversation with clients, first clients that we get is like, the economy's so unstable. Why do I need to be worried about people leaving right now? Right. And the answer is because whether it's reality or not is almost irrelevant. People believe that they can move, and especially the top performers, the people who have the best experience. Right. So the workforce feels pretty confident that they can move. Right. And it really raises the stakes for HR to make it's more critical than ever to understand who our most critical talent is and make sure we retain them, right? And so one effective strategy we've seen that is keeping employees productive and engaged and in the organization is by equipping them not just to be successful in what they're doing now, but for that next job. I've got a really interesting case study from a large global telecom client that I work with. They were actually kind of an early adopter of this long before COVID arrived on our doorstep. They realized the need within their own organization to do a much better job of this. Business was divided, one of these very siloed organizations, probably getting a lot of head nods right now, although that's us too. Different lines of businesses, different segments they were unaware of talent across these boundaries that existed in the organization. And what they found is, one, they were losing people, right? Because people didn't see the career path. And two, they just felt like, man, when we go to fill some of these critical roles that are open, we're having to go outside of the organization more than we feel like we ought to, right? And so they kind of took the step back to look at how do we address this? And they started with that foundational move to cloud talent management and HR solution, right? But they also made a lot of process changes and really turned their approach to managing people upside down. I think the most foundational change that they made was really tearing those walls down and looking at talent as what I'll often refer to as the GE mindset, right? It's the enterprise, the highest level of the organization. These are our people, right? For a firm the size of PwC, we deal with this as well. Like our people are our people. It's not just our consulting business or our tax business or audit. We ought to promote the ability to move across it, right? And so as they did this, they put the talent profile, the ability for people to sell themselves into their own hands, which drove richer data quality, richer data, higher data quality, and began to be able to recommend this notion of career lattice work to their employees. Was it AI from the jump? No, but it really excited the organization. You don't have to roll out the bleeding edge technology to excite your workforce. For them, though, the really cool metric was in the first 12 months of the program, they improved their internal mobility by more than 200%, just by giving people the opportunity to sell themselves and see the opportunities in front of them. They're just a fantastic success story that I love to share when talking about some of this.
It's a great story, right? So I think about a couple of things there where I've seen organizations be super successful, right? Pandemic or not. They know the talent they have. They treat it as an enterprise level asset, right? To your point, I know what Lori and Brittany and Nick bring to the table in terms of all their knowledge, skills, competencies, and experiences. I am transparent about where the need is in the organization. and I offer training to close the gaps, right? And it puts the associate in the driver's seat, right? And more control, right? And I think when there's that kind of transparency, it also builds trust, right? And if we look at this data on the right, like I think people do want that training, right? Like I do feel insecure, but I see where the world is going, or I love the company I work for, maybe I'm bored of my job. What kind of, where does that training come from? And if my organization offers it to me and they want to retain me, like that's part of a great relationship. And I'm willing to invest in it, as we see by the data here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the interesting side of this is people want this. They're willing to spend their own time to make this happen, right? Over the last 2 to 3 years, as we've been out in through surveys and through talking directly with our clients and in more detailed conversations about this, what we find, get outside of the executive level, get down into the organization. What we see is it's gone from 5 or 6 years ago. It was, hey, show me what the new career opportunities are. It's shifted over the last 2 to 3 years to, man, technology is becoming a much bigger part of my job very quickly, right? Things are changing, and there's a legitimate concern out there that if people don't get the digital skills they'll need in the future from the organization they're working for today, then maybe they should go look somewhere else for that, right? This whole gig economy mindset, taking hold of the workforce and causing them to ask their employers to help them prepare for the future. And what scares us is even if that future isn't at the current organization, right? And there's a need for us to realize that as organizations, and so that we have mechanisms in place to not just upskill our employees, but to reward them for that in both the short and long term. They've got to see the tie-in to, hey, yes, what you're seeing, we hear you. That is where the future is headed. And here's what we're going to do to equip you to advance and move up in this organization or make the most out of your career here. And I get we all deal with the notion of everybody doesn't have a path up, right? But there are ways to get people moved over and around the organization to get different experiences. And, I've had a handful of clients. I'm not going to act like every organization I work with is willing to adopt this mindset, but, are we willing to say, you know what, we want to be a place like GE that's known for developing execs that companies all over the world want to hire. Sure, we can only have one CFO at a time, but doesn't it help us attract the best finance talent if at some point we're placing our people out into other organizations as well? It's a difficult mindset sometimes to get lined up with as an organization, but it does help you in the long term attract some of that top talent here.
It does, which leads us, I think, we've talked about how the HR leaders are feeling, how the employees are feeling, and sort of where we are with a bunch of data, which I think brings us up to the next poll question, right? In terms of, I'll let you guys, So if you can take a moment and answer the question, right? Like, so where's your organization investing? We've just covered a lot.
Yeah, and select all that apply. This one will actually let you pick more than one response.
Right. Well. And I'll kind of, and I can kind of step in here a little bit and say, so you'll see that there are a lot of selections, and all of these are areas where we have already seen some degree of response from leaders around where they're focusing their efforts. So it will be interesting to see on this call today, just what in your respective organizations people have been looking to focus on right now. So we'll give a little more time for that to kind of roll in, and I'll recap out the responses and read the percentages there.
Yeah. And I'm looking, we've got a couple of questions in. So while people are responding to the poll, there is a question here about what are the key leadership skills that we're seeing required in 21 and beyond. And
we could do a whole session on that.
Yeah, we absolutely could. And so I'll answer what I have seen that is, I guess, moving up the priority scale, because there's a lot. I would say that the two things that are jumping out to me right now, really across industry, are the notion of authenticity and the notion of empathy, right? And those have not always been the kind of top of the stack skills that we've seen from a leadership perspective. But as it becomes very difficult to draw boundaries around work-life balance when I'm sitting in this chair all day working with clients across every time zone, right? It's important for me to understand what's important to the people that work for me, to be authentic and honest with them about, well, here's what's most important. Here's what we're going to value, and here's how we're going to protect your time as well. There's different ways to measure and guide that, but those two things are really, as we look out for more just taking the technology hat off and looking at just pure, almost HR consulting, HR functional knowledge. Those are two of the things that I see just rapidly moving up and becoming more important than ever right now.
All right.
So, Brittany,
Thanks.
you want to read our results out with this poll question for us?
Yes, I will. So the question was, which of the following workforce initiatives over the past, or is your company planning to implement over the next 12 months? So we see from our responses that the highest, it looks like at 64%, is increased support for well-being and mental health of the workforce. And then in no particular order going out, we see 55% identify ways to increase workforce productivity, 44% increased focus on safe workplaces. Then we see 30% offer new benefits to employees, 22% plan for automation to play a bigger role across the workforce, 32% say reassign upskill workers to other parts of the organization to meet critical needs, 24% say plan for a new resource mix, and then we have 16% saying reduce workforce costs, including layoffs. All right. So moving on, so I'll take this transition, and to Nick's comment, so we were already in the midst of a digital disruption with companies looking to upskill workers, but COVID-19 has added a layer of complexity in that there has been little flexibility with the environment variables. So hopeful that an approved vaccine is on the horizon, there's still a lot to figure out around how that will factor in to bringing people back together safely. So if we're looking at the immediate and short-term impacts to the company work environment, this is very reflective of COVID-19. Traditional company offices, they're not filled with employees right now. We've seen a mass transition to a work from home model seemingly overnight. There's physical distancing protocols that have impacted office space capacity, and employers are very concerned for the safety of their workforce. So the impact of the company office space in the long term is still a little unclear. However, how company offices will be leveraged coming out of all of this has definitely changed. So when we look at the long term, we see that the strategy is not just COVID-19 related. Higher adoption of remote work is looking to drive an increase in the same ways as that of the digital movement. So what Nick had mentioned earlier. So the higher adoption of remote work will increase company resiliency, agility, and employee experience. Companies are continuing to look to leverage technology to drive the same benefits. And COVID-19 has only accelerated the need to get on this now. So when it comes to where companies are focusing as a direct response to COVID, we see a lot of concern for the well-being of employees, similar to the response we just saw in our poll question. And recent survey data shows that companies are wanting to identify ways to increase workforce productivity, increase focus on the safe workplaces, increase support for the well-being and mental health of the workforce, and offer new benefits to employees. But when we look at some of the other responses here, you could say that these are not solely related to COVID-19. This is also a response to the digital disruption. It's temporarily dimmed, but still on the forefront of leaders' minds and important areas that need to be focused on. So the planning for automation to play a bigger role, upskilling workers, plans for a new resource mix. From a recent survey, we see that 58% of HR leaders are currently planning to implement upskilling initiatives, with another 33% considering plans, but they just haven't started yet. HR leaders are tackling a lot right now. They're the leaders who are navigating companies through this pandemic, while they're also still pushing to leverage technology and become more digitally fit for the future. So then these leaders right now have an opportunity more than ever to reinvent where and how work is getting done for their organizations. And both employers and employees have a lot to benefit from this. So let's refer to this idea as the reinvention, the office of the future. Employers have an opportunity to gain resiliency and flexibility. Think back to earlier this year when companies were closing offices and asking people to work from home. Companies who did not have remote work models in place found themselves in a situation where they had a lot of work to do to quickly equip employees with what they needed to be productive. So the Office of the Future can help mitigate those situations from happening again. Another benefit on the employer side is having the potential access to a broader talent base. So shifting focus from the traditional office, companies will see that their radius for being able to recruit talent expands greatly. So they'll want to make sure that they've invested in the right talent tools to gain an advantage in acquiring that talent. So as we'll get on a little bit later, we'll see that this is also a priority area that leaders are already considering. And as Nick mentioned, making sure we want to retain that talent and keep it in-house. And of course, the opportunity for savings. So some companies are looking to reduce office space, which can provide cost savings there. But then we have another angle of cost avoidance. So travel and other expenses. A lot of projects that would bring people together regularly may be able to leverage these virtual environments. And so they'll be able to have some cost savings there as well. And then I'll flip to the employee side really quickly. They are also receiving value in a little bit of a different angle. So employees having an improved choice of where and how they choose to work. So similar to the benefit that employers can gain, employees, they too are going to have a wider range of job opportunities. So when we look at people who maybe had to step away for personal reasons, maybe they moved away because they got married or they moved to go take care of a loved one and the physical space wasn't there. Now that we're expanding that radius for being able to acquire talent, that kind of puts them back in the game. We have better work-life balance, as Lori was mentioning, so not having to commute every day, having the flexibility to step away for midday appointments and more control over the personal work environment. These will be more defined on the employee's terms. And employees, from our survey data, we're seeing that flexible working hours and focus on health and well-being, this is a top priority for them. And they're really looking at how employers are responding right now. HR leaders have already told us they recognize employee anxiety and burnout as the biggest challenges, and we saw here today on this call as well. So that's a very big focus and benefit on the employee side. And then the last bullet up here, we see the sanctioned and encouraged mobility. So this is a benefit, and we've already seen to some degree that employees are already taking advantage of. A recent survey showed that almost a third of employees changed their living situation due to COVID. So whether that was to move to save on living costs a little bit, or just the younger generation in general was raising their hand for voluntary relocations. So we see that, and this can have challenges when it comes to the labor cost and tax and compliance requirements, because as Nick showed on an earlier slide, 28% of HR leaders right now are unable to account where their employees are on a daily basis. So the Office of the Future can help define a process that allows for and encourages employees to take advantage of this benefit. So both employer and employee have some value that can be gained here.
There's so much good stuff in here, right? So a couple of points that, and just kind of validate some of the conversations I'm having with our customers. One of the first questions I begin to ask our customers, people that I deal with, right, on a daily basis is, are you willing to take the work to the people to broaden your talent pool, right? Or are you still going to require that the people come to work? Because there are a lot of options there now, right? And we talked about, how do you retain talent? What does that look like? Do I want to stay? Do I not want to? Like, there's a lot of change going on, right? And I feel like sometimes some of the data is in conflict with each other. But when I take a step back and look at a macro view, I've got, I've got more flexibility in my schedule. So if I put because I am an associate, right? Like, I got an opinion here. I have more flexibility, but I'm also like working more because I'm not commuting, and I have this sense that I need to work more to prove my value because I'm uncertain about my job, right? So I'm trying to triangulate across all of this in a remote world where I spend all day looking at myself either via Zoom or whatever that looks like. So there's a lot going on, right, for all of our associates, for all associates around the world, right? So I think that to the point, Nick, that you made on the skills of leaders in the future, there's the opportunity to empathize and to understand, right, where the employee is and how do you begin to lead remotely, and what does that look like? Because there are a lot of benefits. If I want to spend time doing homework with, someone, my daughter's grown, but like if I were to spend time, like if I want to get a workout in the morning, I have more flexibility to make that choice, right? And I think what it will require HR leaders to do is to manage productivity differently. What is the outcome maybe versus the task, depending on the role. So there's a lot, I think, that's going to change over the next 12 to 24 months, that all of this data is going to inform how we think about that. And it does come back to the culture, right? What is the culture of the organization? How do I want to lead through that as an associate? How do I want to partake in that? And what choice options do I have, whether they are expressly communicated to me or not? And underneath it all, like we talk about all of this stuff, I still need the technology to facilitate it. Right? I need that technology to help me collaborate virtually. I need that technology to know that it's stable, that I can use whatever that platform is to have those conversations, and that it's okay if I mark myself as like, hey, I'm turning my notifications off because I'm doing something else for a while. So there's so much great stuff, right? Like I encourage people to look at the great things that are going on and the way the world of work is changing now, with a more of the positive eye to the future. Because this, right, this, I love this slide, right? There are so many options to embrace here, depending on the way we want to work and the way that our organization's working and the technology that supports me through all of it. So I'll actually take a drink and be quiet and let you guys walk through the slide.
No, I think that's great, Lori. It double clicks us into the where a little bit. So what HR leaders are doing right now is they are the center of the return to office planning and designing a hybrid work atmosphere. And so what we see is there are 3 complementary workplaces that are now available in this office of the future. So first, we have the traditional branded office space that's operated by the company. But when we see now that there are concerns of another rising wave of COVID, leaders are feeling confident that they can keep their employees safe. In fact, only 19% of them are concerned about employees' lack of confidence in their ability to do so. However, when we poll the employees, nearly half are feeling forced to sacrifice their personal safety to stay employed. So there's still some work to do there in terms of aligning with the employee safety concerns when it comes to being in the traditional office. So HR leaders have an opportunity here to help address employee fears by ramping up communication about what the business is doing to help protect people, having measures such as implementing safety protocols, social distancing, and then also looking at what the branded office looks like. Maybe it turns more into hotel spaces where people are allowed to kind of pick where they want to be and have a little autonomy there versus having specific desks laid out. So then in addition to the company office, we see 2 other options laid out on the table. The first is the virtual office, so working from home or any other location. So these are leveraged in situations where maybe there's not a location nearby or the employee is directed or elects to work from home primarily. So employees here will utilize company devices. And when we get a little bit further along into the how piece of it, we'll talk around how employees can be enabled and supported to work in these remote environments. And then the co-working side, just quickly touching on here. So operated by service providers, these workplaces, though they're not company dedicated and branded, they do allow flexibility and maintain that employee collaboration. So when we kind of look at the next slide, we're going to double click into the office space and how that's going to change. But this is a great opportunity for companies to kind of look into to still have that collaboration of bringing people together and that employee engagement. A lot of companies are going to see this virtual office and co-working site. It's going to require a transition. And for companies, it's going to be a different degree, right? So we saw some companies who they struggled a little bit in the beginning. They didn't have that remote work model. But then for others, maybe co-working sites, that's just a new concept for them. But then when we poll leaders in general, it's across the board. We see 7% are saying that their office space needs are going to decrease by at least 25% in the next 3 years. And then we also have some on the other end of the spectrum, 5% saying that they expect an increase in office space by at least 25%. So regardless of outcome, what we see here is the traditional office is going to change, and there's going to be some challenges with that. And we need to look at how we can leverage technology to kind of offset some of those. So I'll transition here and quickly I'll walk through. So breaking out some of the activity that's typically seen in the office, and just talk about how that's going to change. So what this slide is laying out with the deep colored arrows is the physical branded company space. Because of COVID, what are we seeing across these 5 Cs? And I'll walk through each of them briefly. starting with collaboration. We see the office staying the same for this. There's going to continue to be a space for colleagues and clients to come together and co-create content, and it's going to be used for tackling those difficult situations. So even during these times where offices may be at limited capacity, we still see people going in to run payroll, conducting benefits open enrollment, cutting over to deploy new technologies, and companies will continue to leverage the office as they conduct these activities. But then getting a little bit into the creation, communication, and coaching, we see there's a little bit of a negative impact to the office space. So for creation, we see this moving away unless it requires access to maybe some sensitive content. So employees are going to be carrying this out remotely, and we have an opportunity here to plug in some digital tools to offset that negative. So we can incorporate automation and AI, specifically things such as machine learning, natural language processing, helping employees with their analyses and research. The communication bucket, the exchange of information, outside of the critical or coaching discussions, these are going to move away from the office. So companies are going to have to find ways to reach out and engage with internal and external groups. And we have to be cognizant of over emailing. We hear the comments that people have just had too much virtual. So we look here for technology again to provide us an advantage. So implementing chatbots, digital assistants to help with common questions around open enrollment, payroll, those company events. In the traditional office, there were probably a lot of branded communications throughout the premises, but now that's going to have to be recreated in a virtual form. And then there's also another opportunity here to leverage the AI piece, and you can help intelligently gauge and make data-driven decisions around when communication is necessary and to whom. So being able to have that and send out, it'll make it more meaningful and help reach your employee population there. On the coaching side, we see some adjustment here a little bit. There's still, the office will have a role in some of the critical conversations, but again, virtual interaction is increasing in this space. And so here's another area where we can see leveraging chatbots, VR, skills learning. So having chatbots providing an open channel for employees to solicit responses to common and popular questions. So asking about career pathing or what skills training, kind of having some back and forth there so they know what questions to go to some of the leaders in their organization or maybe their manager. And then VR is an interesting one because it could be creatively used for on-the-job training. So we see this being able to immerse people in lifelike scenarios and effectively learn without consequence. And then the upskilling piece is of the utmost importance. We saw the data, it's on leaders' minds, and just as we talk through all of this shift to technology, how do you leverage these digital tools? There's a slight disconnect between the executives of companies and then when you get down to the manager levels around how they're perceiving these that are being rolled out. So we'll kind of need to course correct on that piece and use some of the upskilling to catch people up to speed on just what the outcome of the transformation is, aimed to be. And then last, we see community piece here, so socializing with team members, building community, having the relationships. So the office will continue to be a place where this engagement happens, but companies are going to need to consider how to continue to maintain that community in other workplaces for the office of the future. Because going virtual, you have to find a way to engage. You're not able to take people out to lunch, have those in-person happy hours. So that will be an area that will be a focus as well. So I'll take a pause there. We'll take a quick break for another polling question.
Yeah, and Brittany, if you want to read the question and get us started, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that as people are responding to the poll, I'll try to answer a couple of these that are sitting out here.
Yeah, and real quick before we kick off the poll, I do want to note that this question is more focused on the HR tech challenges, because outside of HR tech, we know that HR leaders right now are preparing to continue to address the toughest challenges. We have COVID, mental health, racial injustice, the economy, and HR leaders recognize and tackling those is important for the business. But for this particular question, we are looking through the HR tech lens. So our question is, what's the biggest human capital challenge that your organization is facing? All right. And Nick, did you want to go over a few of the questions from the chat?
Yeah, and while Yeah, and while people are responding, there's a question here. Someone posts, you mentioned that the workforce has to be equipped to work differently. How do you achieve this remotely when you have to manage employees in various locations? And what I will point to is there are certain industries who had kind of figured this out, maybe not perfected it, but figured this out better than others kind of pre-COVID. So if you look at industries where you had that already had a workforce that was not necessarily always at the desk, so whether it's high sales driven organizations, any other roles that are high travel, we were already seeing a major shift in how people delivered learning, right? And what it gets down to is really a shift from, hey, sign up for this multi-hour training course, and delivering learning really to a mobile device, that kind of thing, in much more like bite-sized fashion, right? Whether it's through podcasts or other mediums as well that people are consuming, right? And it actually helps. That actually helps answer one of the other questions that I saw of, hey, there's so much work to be done. How can leaders do it all? The short answer is they can't on their own anyway. And so preparing the organization and equipping them with the skills to take on some of that work, to work differently, allows our leaders to focus in different hopefully more efficient ways as well. I think we could probably have an entire webinar on how we can become more efficient as leaders and what we're seeing there. But I do think a lot of it is in helping to drive different behaviors at the employee and workforce level as well. So Brittany, if you want to recap, I know we got 2 slides to finish driving through here, and try to wrap things here in the next 4 minutes.
Yep. So
No
we'll do it. Challenge accepted. So I'll quickly recap these. So 33% responded finding, attracting, and retaining talent as the biggest challenge. 18% say developing people to reach their full potential. 14% say improving the employee experience. 13% say creating collaborative work environments. 6% say workforce planning. And then we have 15% who say ensure well-being, diversity, and inclusivity. All right. So knowing that we have 2 slides to go through, what I'd like to do is just briefly touch on this and us quickly get to the next slide. So as we mentioned earlier, HR leaders are expecting to be some challenges as we transition into this remote world. And so what we see here are some enablers of remote working broken into the 3 buckets of people, process, and technology. And what we're going to see is remote work is just a piece of the puzzle. So this is accounting for the shift of where work is being done. The next piece that we need to look at are the core processes that need to be updated to reflect the requirements of this more virtual workforce. So I will quickly transition to the next, because I do want to touch on this slide. In order to accommodate this office of the future, core people processes will need to be enabled with an approach and tools to support remote work. So here we see some examples laid out across some of our key areas. So leveraging remote tools such as video interviewing, video conferences, virtual trainings, and career fairs. So those will be needed, but also approaches to talent development, team building, talent partnerships. Those will also need a virtual presence if companies are going to support a virtual workforce in the future. However, there's another layer here that we need to consider, and this goes back again to that digital disruption. How can we leverage technology in these areas? How will that help companies achieve the resiliency and flexibility that they were already looking for? And leaders have cited that their top concerns for 2020 from an HR tech perspective are, first, attracting top talent and keeping them, developing everyone to reach their potential, and then improving people's work experience, primarily by automating tasks. So in today's world, there's more than likely one app that's poking employees on a daily basis, presenting work opportunities. And as we heard from Nick, employees are particularly confident that they can go elsewhere on their terms. So how do you keep employees wanting to stay? And this is where companies are looking to technology. Leaders are focusing on the employee. We saw notable responses for talent acquisition tools, employee experience, skills mapping, career pathing, the intelligent recruiting. And it's not the technology alone that's going to provide that meaningful and engaging work experience, but it does provide the foundation to modernize HR for ways that people want to work and also for what the business needs. And what we see is that overall, 74% of companies recently surveyed are planning to increase HR tech spend in 2020 to be able to address these pressing talent needs.
Yeah.
So I'll quickly summarize. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
No, I was going to say they all have to catch up.
Oh, Lori?
No,
Yeah. No. Brittany, there was one question that I do want to make sure I hit before we drop here. It was a question about, there was a 14% gap between male respondents who felt confident they could go in the next 3 months and get a job versus female respondents. And the question was, how do we close that gap? And the truth is, it's hard to get a company to tell us to run a survey internally on, hey, who thinks they could go leave us and get a job somewhere else? But if I compare it to other types of data points, really where we are able to close that gap and get much more even in those types of responses is when we make diversity and inclusion a little bit of a horizontal, like you see technology here. From an analytics standpoint, are we looking for that data? From a performance standpoint, are we rewarding people who promote diversity, who promote inclusion within the workforce? And is that something we're valuing as an organization? So it's a little bit of a soft skill answer there, but the simple truth is it has to become equal priority in the organization to some of the other things that we've talked about here.
Yeah, I think as we begin to wrap, so I know in the chat there was a comment or a link there to download the deck, right? And there's so much great data in here. We could probably go on for at least another hour discussing it and debriefing it. So I want to thank everybody who joined today for sure, and spent your time with us, because that's, that really does matter. And Brittany and Nick, I really enjoyed the conversation. So I definitely look forward to kind of digging into it a little bit more and working with you in the future. And to some of the questions around where do I start, I think it depends on, or there's so much work to be done. You have to triangulate across your business strategy, your culture. And what we've heard repeated, a lot today is around the talent and the skills and reaching out and making sure that you have that kind of place, right? Where talent and skills are valued from an associate perspective and what that looks like. So let me turn it back to hr.com to close this out. And we really appreciate all your time. And no matter where you are in the world, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'd like to thank our presenters as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archived recording will be available on the hr.com website within 24 hours. The webcast credit will show in your hr.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.